Okay, so I'd like to introduce Paul Welch. Welcome to those who are online. You're warmly welcome to this session. I've had the privilege of just listening to Paul talk. You're going to be listening to someone who is embedded in the classroom, but who's also embedded in research and has that lovely link between those two worlds. So over to you to introduce yourself. Thank you, Paul.
Thanks very much. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me in this session. What I'm going to be talking about is how we can monitor our students' metacognitive development. A tiny bit of an intro to understand how I got to this point. Number of years, well, just about 13 years ago, I left teaching. I went into medical education. Soon after starting that journey in medical education, working with intern doctors, I was asked to develop a program to teach clinical reasoning or thinking skills to intern doctors. That led me on a journey of looking at what it is that actually helps them to think and regulate their learning, hence into the area of metacognition. Pedal on 10 years, I finished my research in that area, and I'm very keen to help us as teachers understand how we can not just help our students develop as learners, but also help them to develop the skills they need in life going forward. So I'm going to talk a little bit about metacognition, what it is, and then talk about how we can monitor it, and then how we've done that at Townsville Grammar School and set up a longitudinal project. I'm hoping my screen behaves. There we go. So at the school, we have a teaching and learning framework. Many schools do. You may have one there. Within our teaching and learning framework, we have the learner traits area, which speaks very much to the learner's toolbox we're hearing about this morning. Within the learner traits section, there's an area which is called self-regulation. So we recognize that students having self-regulatory skills are really important. Ollie talked about this earlier on and expanded on that. I thought that was a fantastic talk. Within self-regulation, metacognition is a key component. So what is it? Should it be intentionally developed? How can it be developed? And then the area which I'll spend most of my talk talking about this morning, which is how can we monitor it? So first of all, what is metacognition? Well, many folks will talk about metacognition as being thinking about thinking, which doesn't really help us unpack it too much. You'll have seen diagrams like this. Let me give you a bit of a storyline to how metacognition works. So I often think of it as the voice inside your head, which helps you solve problems in life by asking you questions like, what is the problem here? Based on what I already know about a task, how can I solve the problem? So that's the planning side of metacognition. The monitoring side of it is, based on what I already know, am I making progress? Is this correct? How am I getting along? Constantly reflecting as you're doing the task. And then evaluating the task at the end of it. How did it go? What could I have done better? What was easy? What was more difficult? So metacognition, thinking about thinking, sits on top of the cognition process. It's really to do with how we regulate what we think about and what particular learning tools we use in the classroom when we want our students to develop. There are two parts to it. There's a knowledge of cognition, which is knowing how we learn. So some of the stuff Sarah was talking about in her keynote, understanding how our memories work. Some of the skills to do with learning. This links back to Ollie's talk right at the beginning of this session this morning. There's a knowing how we learn, but importantly, how we regulate our thinking. So this is the self-monitoring process of how we're tracking with our learning journey. Some people are more metacognitive than others. Let me give you an illustration of why it's so important. as teachers in the room, whether you're there online like I am, or you're physically present with Vicky, we understand that some of our students are poor performers. And Dunning comes up with this quote. He says, poor performers are doubly cursed. Their lack of skill deprives them not only of the ability to produce the correct response, but also the expertise necessary to surmise that they're not producing them. So some of the weaker students in our class are not only failing to reach the level of achievement we want them to, but they very often don't understand that they're not achieving it or have no idea how to get to where we want them to get to. So they're doubly cursed is what Dunning comes up with. So having metacognitive awareness is critical because it gives us insight to understand not just where our deficiencies are, but also what we can do about them. You'll have come across adults who you would say have insight or don't, and the same with students. And that journey of developing metacognitive awareness begins quite early on. We develop those skills naturally, but what I'm encouraging us to think about is that we should intentionally seek to cultivate those skills. So should we do it? I think it's kind of obvious. Yes, we should. It's not just me who talks about it as being important. You can see here that the Victoria State Government, within their documentation for their high intensity teaching strategies, talk about it. The Education Endowment Foundation, have done extensive research in that area, international baccalaureate and evidence for learning as well. So they talk about, in Beach's paper here, metacognitive strategies are among the most influential factors in student learning. So they're very important, and we should intentionally seek to cultivate them. I'll talk about this very briefly. I encourage you to go to the Education Endowment Foundation and to find this document. It is outstanding. Everything they produce is outstanding, but this is certainly amongst them. And they talk about how you can explicitly develop metacognitive skills within the classroom. And maybe towards the end of this session, if I've got time, we could talk about that a little bit more, because I'm mainly interested in how we can monitor progress and talk about our experience from up here at Townsville Grammar School. So can we monitor it? Well, yes, we can. And we can use a specific instrument or a research tool to do that. It's been around since 2002, which I think is very important because it means that it's had plenty of time to be picked up and for people to use it and for researchers to determine if it's actually valid and does its job properly. And it does. There's plenty of articles, plenty of papers that look at this and look at the statistics behind it and determine whether it actually does what it says on the tin. These are the questions that it asks. So there are 18 of them. They're very straightforward questions. We've had students in our junior school and in the high school do this questionnaire. You can see that the students respond on a Likert scale from 1 to 5. And the questions are worded in such a way that there's very little wriggle room or ambiguity in their meaning. So, for example, question 1, I know when I understand something, and the student scales where they come on that on the Likert scale. How does this link to metacognition? How does it link to the 2 key areas I mentioned at the start to do with knowledge of cognition, so knowing what strategies to use, and the regulation of cognition, being able to determine whether those strategies are working and what to do about them. This diagram helps us to understand how the items or the questions are linked to those 2 domains. So if we look to item number 7 at the top, and then I take you back to what item 7 or question 7 was, which is when I'm done with my schoolwork, I ask myself if I learned what I wanted to learn. So the student would scale themselves, and then we can see this links to regulation of cognition. As we can see, the line up here connects this question to this domain. what we've done here at Townsville Grammar is I've taken the Junior Metacognitive Awareness Inventory questionnaire. I put it onto Microsoft Forms and put it into a format so that we can collect the data nice and easily, and then we can statistically analyze it. You can see I've got my little red arrow up there. At the high school, we had 535 responses. We also did at the junior school, grades 3 to 6, because students need to be able to read to do these questions. We had 203 responses. A quick summary of what we've got in our data. You can see the year level along the bottom, so grades 7 through to 12. And you can see that the blue line represents knowledge of cognition, and the orange line regulation of cognition. What do we hope to achieve by doing this? Well, we're interested in tracking individual students. So we want to be able to see how a student did in grade 7 and then compare that with how they did in grade 8, 9 and onwards. The way we're looking at the data we're gathering is that naturally, we know from the literature that students increase their metacognitive capacity during their adolescence. When someone gets into their early 20s, their metacognitive awareness levels tend to plateau, and then in old age, they decline. So a student in grade 8 measured now, which should be given a year's time, so between now and in a year's time, should be pretty much at the average of where a year 9 student is. If they've increased dramatically, we want to know why. If the whole cohort next year and the year after is higher than the baseline is now for that year level, so the 7 through to 8, 7 should improve or get better at metacognitive awareness to where the current year 8s are. If there's a rise in that, then what we're thinking is that's potentially due to some of the interventions we're doing here at school with staff, with students, introducing more metacognitive talk into the classroom and making teachers more aware of the importance of metacognition. So we can track individual students. We're thinking we can track year levels too. The intention is to raise student metacognitive awareness overall. I'm very happy to take questions and hear your thoughts, ideas, etc.
Thank you very much, Paul. So I'm going to open it up to the floor and to those of you on the chat. Have we got any questions for Paul? Any thoughts?
How do they organise their curriculum? Do they teach this explicitly with a timetabling footprint?
Yeah.
They talk about processes.
Okay. All right. So the question, Paul, is how do you organise this in your curriculum? Do you embed it, or is it taught separately? You know, how does this actually look like in your classrooms?
How do we seek to cultivate metacognitive skills? Yeah.
Correct. Yeah.
So we've tried to do this. We're still very much on a learning curve, so I'm not pretending we've got this. We're experts in the application of it, and we're aware of the importance of it. We've done this through Teacher PD. We've done this through working in PLC groups with our staff, so helping staff to focus on what are the key elements of metacognition that they want to bring into their classrooms. Some of these strategies which are talked about in this document, I'll go back to that. So easy strategies which teachers can use is to encourage think aloud within their classrooms. So when they're asking students to respond to questions, or when they're doing it themselves, scaffolding, to think aloud, to actually help students to talk about what metacognition is, and some of the struggles a student may have with that. So to bring in some of this language into the classrooms. So teacher education, seeking teachers to apply it in the classroom, and then, yeah, practicing it. It's not easy. It's not easy.
Right, thank you. Another question coming.
What have been your biggest successes and biggest challenges?
What have been your biggest successes and your biggest challenges?
I think one of our biggest successes is helping teachers to be aware of the importance of it, of what metacognition is and how they can think about it and use it in their subjects. And what was the second part of the question? Some of the biggest challenges?
Challenges, yeah.
Yeah, some of the biggest challenges are getting teachers who, by the very nature of the fact many of us have taught for quite a while, to break those old habits of how we do things and try new stuff. So Ollie talked about it in his talk, actually, right at the start. He talked about this crystallization idea of how students become more crystallized or fixed in their way of thinking about learning. We as teachers are exactly the same. It's difficult to change habits.
Interesting. Yes, Dr.
I
King.
had one about the graph. I couldn't quite see the graph. I wondered what the change was as you went through grades.
The blue and the red.
The blue and the red. It was just looked like a flat line, and I'm sorry I didn't fully understand the graph. But
So this is your baseline data. The
Yes,
question it's quite subtle.
it's very subtle, yes.
Are you saying that in terms, I'll just put out a question, in terms of regulation, you're looking at very small increments of increase as the as the students get older, is that right?
Yeah, it's a very interesting question. Your member of staff in the room's asked. We've never seen data we've never seen this questionnaire being applied in the classroom. So there's no literature out there on its application, just on the development of it. So we had expected the changes to be slightly more marked than they are. This is just one set of data from 2021. We're about to do it again because we do it annually in October. So we'll see what happens this year. I'm very interested to know what it'll be like in different schools. So if we end up collaborating with other schools and using this, it'll be quite interesting. I also want to know what it looks like, in the general populace as well. But these changes do look very subtle, especially from 9 to 12, which is where you would expect it to increase. The knowledge of cognition is pretty much flat. The regulation slightly inclined, but very, very shallow incline.
So will you be able to measure the effectiveness of your interventions? As you know, that's what you're looking for?
Kind of hoping to be able to, yeah, but I guess unless we try it out, we won't know. So there's no literature out there to show this being tried in other schools for the purpose that we're trying to use it for. What we're trying to use it for, I think, is a kind of obvious application, but
Yeah, great.
yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, another question.
Just a bit more on that junior metacognitive awareness inventory. When is the applying that? Only sort of like applying with this knowledge and regulation when managing it. Because you said they use the junior metacognitive awareness inventory.
Yes.
The success rate and non-success rate. So is there a bit more knowledge on that?
Partially heard the question. Maybe you can reiterate, Vicky.
I'm not-
Junior metacognitive
So the
awareness
junior-
inventory.
So could you show us your junior metacognitive awareness inventory? This one?
Yeah.
Is that to all year levels?
Oh,
And
do
then-
you apply this to all year levels from year 7 through to 12?
Yes.
Yes, you do.
So the junior one is developed for school children. I've used in my own separate research when I was doing my PhD, the adult version, which has got 36 items. And instead of like,
To use that for teachers?
it's interesting. If you dig out this Sperling paper, so the paper I've got listed on the bottom of this, there's actually 3 different instruments, and one of them is specifically designed for teachers.
Oh,
But it's designed for teachers to assess their classroom, which is not quite as interesting as I think you guys are fishing for. But the adult version, which is Scraw and Dennison to 1994, is meant for adults.
Great, thank you.
interestingly, and this is a bit of a sidetrack, when I was talking to one of my friends in medical education, he was suggesting that the adult version should be used as a screening tool for doctors going into specialist training to determine whether they have the insight necessary to actually successfully complete their training.
That is interesting.
Yeah, very interesting application.
Just before we let you go and let everyone go off to morning tea, I happen to know you had one final secret slide. Would
Oh,
you
yes, yeah.
be going over to that one?
Yeah, we'll jump to that one. So these are the references, and you can see all that in the thing. This is an interesting slide because it talks of, I won't tell you where I pilfered it from, but basically it's looking at student achievement, and you can see in here we've got areas which you and I would regard it as more to do with well-being. So stress management up the top there. There's a few other, what else have we got? Team support, etc. But within that, we can also see there are memory skills, there's study skills, there's metacognitive skills, where we look at how we work independently, and organizational skills and being results orientated. So the blend of well-being, metacognition, knowing about memory, knowing about learning strategies, they all interlink. And my, I guess, take-home point is anyone who tells you otherwise is not telling you the truth. They're very much interlinked.
Okay. Can I ask everyone in the room to give Paul a clap? Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for being with me.
For those joining online and so on, thank you so much for your participation as well today. We hope you enjoyed the TeachMeet. These recordings will be on our Learners Toolkit website. They'll also be on our YouTube channel. And thank you so much to our presenter. Thank you, Paul. Time for a break and time for some morning tea. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. I better head off, Vicky. I better go off and teach.
Fantastic. Thank you so much.
No worries. See you later on. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.